Good evening, dear people of the tube, dear people of Britain, comrades and friends. Week 5 is over of the UK official lockdown, and we're still locked down. We're now actually, as I film this, just into week 6. It is now Tuesday night. What's the day? It is the 28th of April. April's nearly over already. I can't believe that. And to be quite frank, considering I've been locked in the house for 6 weeks actually, because we started before the actual lockdown, I must say that's flown past really. Quite surprised. Mind you, I haven't been idle. I've kept myself busy, which I think is important. I've had a bit of a daily routine which I set myself, which I think is important as well. My mane has definitely grown. This is getting a bit too long as well, so I think I'll be down the barbers as soon as I can. But when that'll be, who knows. So yeah, week 5's been and gone. It again. So some things changed, some things stayed the same. Still a PPE crisis. All of the promises. I want to do a montage of all of the promises from all of the ministers and the health minister and what's his name, Dominic Raab, and all the rest over PPE promises, particularly during their daily press conferences, because of course here we are, still not enough PPE. Came out yesterday and today that I think it's 1 in 4 doctors or something are having to reuse their protective equipment. Yesterday I saw that I had heard this actually for the last few weeks, that British manufacturers that actually make a lot of the PPE equipment for export have contacted the government and offered them their services, their goods, but because of some technicality, because they're not on the official approved list of government procurement, NHS procurement, apparently they're not being, haven't been responded to, let alone bought anything. So this is, for me, I think for me it's 5 weeks in now, coming up 6 weeks, for the official lockdown. I think, amongst many things, and you might agree with this, what I don't understand, and not just in the UK, obviously I watch a lot of the news over in the US as well. So in the West, let's say the West, the UK, the US, which probably represent the West along with France and Germany, I don't understand why the UK and the US haven't, redirected the economy, redirected domestic manufacturing, to make the things we've needed. Ventilators. Heard very, very little, read very little about ventilators in the past 2-3 weeks. First week or so, along with PPE, it was a big story. We don't have enough ventilators. That seems to have gone completely quiet. Now, knowing the mainstream media here, that doesn't mean we've got the ventilators. That says to me something's gone wrong, because if you remember, weeks and weeks and weeks ago, at the beginning of this, the government made the bizarre decision, seemingly bizarre, to, rather than buy ventilators from ventilator manufacturers, same sort of thing with the PPE manufacturers, they decided to hand out new contracts to companies like Dyson and McLaren to design and make ventilators for the NHS. In an emergency, companies that don't have any experience in designing or making ventilators for the NHS. Simply bizarre. Or is it? I'll come back to that in a minute, because I've got a general overarching theory of how this isn't actually. It is bizarre, but it isn't. I think there's a plan here that we're not being told. I think that's pretty obvious. I think there always was, and it's continued. The plan's continued, but I just think we're not being told about it, basically. So that's continuing every week. That just seems to be in the headlines. As of yesterday, Monday, Johnson's checked out of his country retreat checkers and checked back into number 10. There was a lot of speculation in the morning that he was back at work but wouldn't be doing any work, wouldn't appear, and within hours he was appearing out the front of number 10 at the sort of lectern, giving his usual blustering bullshits, nonsense about what was the term? We've exceeded expectations, and I mean, I still 24 hours later, I don't know what the hell he was talking about. Exceeded expectations in what sense? Because if he's talking about exceeded expectations, yet we have, at their own estimate, 22,000 dead people because of coronavirus. One of the worst mortality rates in the world. I mean, top 5, I think, actually. Top 3. But then, of course, we know, particularly from the last week, that that's probably actually about half of the real figure. Because in the last week, week 5, it came to light in the press and for us to see that actually the figures we were being given, the death statistics, were just those from collected within the hospitals. They didn't include those in nursing homes and in people's own homes out in the community, or here in the community. Depending on who you listen to, well, seems to be from independent sort of experts and statisticians and things like that, and doctors and stuff, that they reckon it's probably double that in reality. So, a figure of 43,000 deaths, that's exceeding expectations. That would, I think, mean, from what I've read and heard, that the UK is second only to the United States in the highest number of deaths directly attributed to COVID and related to COVID. A big problem again that came out in week 5 was that it's become clear that a lot of people are dying because they're not going to A&E, they're not going to hospital with things that they usually go to hospital and A&E with. So they're being classed as COVID-related deaths. But no fear, doesn't matter, don't worry. If your loved ones have died, or are dying, or will die, because of what the government didn't do, I'll come back to that in a minute, again, which we found out in this past week, Boris Johnson failed to do, right at the beginning of this crisis in January. No fear, because we're constantly being told, well, by the MSM and even by Tory ministers, that at the end of this there will be an independent inquiry into what the government did and didn't do, and to what extent they mishandled the crisis, and how many deaths can be attributed or linked to their mishandling or not. So I'm sure that will comfort you, anyone out there who's lost a loved one or relative. What comfort. What comfort. At the end of this, you will have to wait years, a year or more, for an independent inquiry with the terms of reference set, usually by the government or somebody associated with the government, really investigating themselves. As happens with a lot of inquiries. I mean, I was told it's going to be a Chilcot type inquiry. I mean, that just fills you with. I don't know about you. That fills me with confidence into Boris Johnson's handling. Basically, that came actually from one of his own ministers. And before Boris Johnson returned, I think it was the end of last week. I saw that in the news. One of his own ministers at the daily briefing, I think, said, assured us that his own Prime Minister Boris Johnson would face a Chilcot-like inquiry. Just bizarre. That's something that's come out of this last week, which has just been strange to see, is that the Daily Mail newspaper, and other usually Tory supporting, Johnson supporting conservative pundits, media types, are not defending Johnson. Actually, they're attacking Johnson personally, and I was a bit confused by this at the beginning of the week. I thought, I don't understand why, but then I think it's become clearer that the plan is, now that Starmer's in, for Johnson's backers, the Tories' backers in the media, Mr. Murdoch, Mr. Dacre, the usual suspects, that Johnson has become such a liability. His negligence, his crimes against the people due to his criminal negligence in the handling of this, literally from the moment he won, well, the Tories won the election, or should I say Labour lost the election in December, it has been is so stark and out there, and even they can't hide it. Even they can't hide 40,000 deaths. It's going to be more than that. It's going to be higher than that, isn't it? I guess second only to the US and in the world sort of stats of COVID deaths. So they're out for his blood, even on some of the front pages on the television. That's been very strange to see. But of course, you always got to think, why? Why are they doing this? And I think quite a few people in the know are thinking, Starmer's back, Labour's back, as a sort of a I don't know, slimmed down version of New Labour with Starmer and the new shadow cabinet. Tony Blair was always behind all of that and working behind the scenes to get it back to this position. And with Johnson doing a terrible job, the Tories doing a terrible job that they're doing, to put it mildly, and the blame that will now be the inquiry and everything else that will be coming their way after this. I think they're thinking, we want Blair back one way or another, basically. So whether that means Blair will actually become an MP again, actually get back onto the shadow front bench and effectively on the front. I mean, I'm assuming that as the handling has been so bad and the reputational damage is so bad to Johnson and the Tories, I think that what they're trying to do is get Johnson to step down, go for somebody to become acting Prime Minister, which means, of course, you're not going to go the next 4.5 years to the next scheduled general election. There would have to be probably an election before that, which of course would give someone like Blair an opportunity to stand again and run again for Parliament. So that's all going to be interesting to see how that unfolds and pans out, if the theory is right or not. Doesn't really help us, again, as usual. Two cheeks of the same backside, I'm afraid. But so again, last week we found out, although I knew, but they came out in the press so that everybody knows, really. I knew this anyway, that Johnson dropped the ball back in January. He skipped 5 cabinet Cobra emergency meetings back in January, which were set up specifically to assess the seriousness of COVID and to plan what to do. I mean, that's the job of government, is to plan, is to make contingency plans, to make contingency for things like this. This is why we have the drills. Again, found out again, there was a drill back in 2016 which actually emulated a deadly virus from the Far East had come to Britain and basically put the sort of NHS and the emergency services through their paces to see if they could cope. If we had the equipment, if we had the adequate strategy, if we had the numbers of specialist staff and general staff to do it. And the results were apparently so bad, so alarming, that to this day the government have never released the actual results, the actual report. But we know the general sort of finding from that was that, or result from that, was that we would not be, back in 2016, prepared, able to respond. And in those 4 years, not only has nothing been done to increase the beds in ICU and hospital, increase the ventilators, the PPE, or any of the other stuff, increase the specialist sort of nursing and care, and all of the other sort of frontline staff that you'd need. Not only has that not happened, but actually, of course, it's all been cut back and cut back and cut back in a pursuit, the continuing pursuit after 10 years of privatisation by stealth. Not just with the NHS, of every aspect of the state. I mean, you've got. I mean, again, I haven't heard now. Again, so I'm assuming it's gone through the roof even more than it was. But 3 weeks ago, I think, it was announced that 1.2 million people had suddenly started to claim for universal credit within the first 2 weeks of the lockdown. That was 3 weeks ago. Christ knows what the figure is now. And I know the system will not be able to take that easily, because there are significant problems just trying to get onto universal credit. I've found out through another YouTube channel, you should check it out, Mark My Words, fantastic channel, that, and that's today actually, that the DWP and the Minister, the Minister of State for Social Security, Therese Coffey, I think her name is, despite being asked to do this by MPs and sections of the media, even some sections of the media, to actually get rid of this, the inbuilt 5 week wait from application of universal credit to payment, and to also turn the advance payment, so you don't have to wait 5 weeks before you get payment, from a loan to a grant. They've refused. And as Mark says in his video, go and watch it, I really recommend that. The only conclusion that could really be drawn from that is that when and if the people that are having to sign on now in their millions onto universal credit that wouldn't usually be on it come off, if there are jobs for them to come off to, this is probably the Tories thinking, is that all of a sudden sanctions which have been suspended will be back. The requirement to look for spend 35 hours a week doing what we can to sort of secure work and look for work will be back. It'll still be an advance loan. It'll still be a 5 week wait, because they don't want to get rid of the punishment. They've just momentarily suspended the horror of universal credit, the real horror parts of universal credit that lead people to suicide and lead to the early deaths of people. You know, again, I say it a lot, but before COVID, 130,000 plus minimum have had their lives cut short directly as a result of the Tories' reforms of welfare and social care. It's all out there. It's not, the media know about it, they just don't tell you about it. So if you think, on Monday yesterday when he came back from back to work, as it were, Johnson apparently, before he came out to speak to us, it was, will his near-death experience have changed his view of how his view of the sort of handling of COVID so far, and will he sort of buck his ideas up basically and do what he's supposed to do. Really, I mean, whoever thought that was really going to happen with Boris Johnson and the Tories lives in some sort of fantasy world. If Boris Johnson, for the past 10 years, as Mayor of London, Tory MP after that, Foreign Secretary after that, and now Prime Minister, Tory Prime Minister, was perfectly happy to turn a blind eye, nay, support reforms of the NHS and reforms of the welfare and social care system that led to the deaths of at least 130,000 of the most vulnerable people in the country, do you think he's going to blink an eye at all at the official figure of 20 plus thousand dead from COVID? Or even if he accepts the 40,000 figure, that's the more realistic one, do you think he's going to blink an eye? He didn't even blink an eye, as I say, at what his government was doing to people for 10 years. Literally killing off the poor through governmental social policy. And he supported. Why would his brush with death change his mind? Although again, I find that all, I'm still confused by all of that. Maybe you are too. It was all, again, yesterday it was all this, he's a new man, he's a changed man, he's had this sort of near-death experience, and his experience in St Thomas's Hospital, and of the care from the fantastic NHS staff and all this has completely changed his. So this is from Tories basically, in the government and outside the government in the MSN. Of course it hadn't. Was he going to come out of hospital and say to his big billionaire business buddies and backers that back the Tory party and him, oh well, I've decided actually, I've decided to completely do a 360 and not implement policies, not run government so that it profits you, because of course what's happening during us is, the big boys, the real profiteers are making a fortune. Here in Wales, over the past week, we find out that the Welsh government has failed so badly in trying to administer its own testing regime in the country, that it's actually handed the responsibility to Amazon. And Amazon, when I say handed, I mean obviously contracted. So we're paying Amazon to write software so that the people of this country can book tests, and then Amazon books them and administers all of that sort of stuff, administrates for an entire country, for the Welsh government. Apparently the same thing's happening in England. I can't remember what the name of the company was, But no, it's another giant private company. Deloitte is it, I think, doing their testing. We've had the Tories have, and I'm afraid Bob Sabre have handed the response to coronavirus 5 weeks late, 6 weeks late, literally into the hands of companies owned by their billionaire backers. If you think that's by mistake, if you think that's because they just happen to be inept, or they just happen to be incapable through mistake, from messing up what should have been a response, I'm afraid you're being extremely naive. If you don't think they're not going to use this crisis as a means of printing money, as a means of enriching themselves, once in a lifetime chance, once in a lifetime chance for the biggest and most influential companies to just rake money in while you're suffering, and you can't feed yourself and you can't pay your bills. Believe me, someone's making something out of it. Look at the last major crisis here in the US and the West. Who made vast amounts of money during that crisis, the Second World War, while everybody else was being bombed and killed, going to war, suffering, couldn't, on rations? The rich men, the big companies. It's no different in that sense from then to now. That's what the Tories are doing. The Tories are clearly still, unofficially, following the policy of herd immunity, their policy from the beginning. They just don't talk about it now, or would deny it if you asked them, but that's what they're doing. And using it to make sure that they can farm off, new, shiny new, big fat public contracts with public money off to their billionaire mates who back the Tory party, who back and employ Dominic Cummings and ensconce him into number 10, into meetings that he shouldn't have been at. Again, something we found out last week. When the Prime Minister wasn't there, Dominic Cummings was an advisor, unelected advisor. The real Prime Minister, because he's the real inside man of the billionaires. There to keep tabs, there to give their orders, basically to Johnson. So that's what's been going on in week 5. Things are not getting better for the 99% of us that are not rich, don't have Boris Johnson's ear, don't pay him one way or another to make sure that we get make sure that we take from people who haven't got it. So I think that's it. I think that's all that's happened really this one. Oh, that's all. I think that's mostly what's happened in the 5th week. Approaching half an hour already on the clock. It's hard to fit everything in because there's such a lot going on. I'm trying to remember. Like I said, I never have sort of a crib sheet, so I should really try to remember basically what's going on. But it's becoming clearer and clearer. I think people are being shocked that people actually thought that there was a government, and that they did there were systems in place and organisations in place to jump in when this sort of thing happened, or crises happen, and are quickly finding out that there's no government, there's no planning, there's nothing there to save us. The third sector, which of course has been basically trying to sort of fill the gap where, as the state's been shrunk over the past 10 years and the safety net's been removed, of course most of them haven't got, in your community like here, haven't got the funds or the money or the people to step in where government just isn't anymore. So yeah, I think it's down to us. It's down to us. It's down to our communities across the country. It's down to us to create our own alternatives locally and politically. So I'd recommend personally going and having a look at some new parties, or a new party, specific new party that's been set up, the Workers' Party of Britain. Have a read. I'm an independent myself, councillor, but I do have friends and comrades in that party. It's been around only 4 months and it's already doing very well by all accounts. Lots of people joining, lots of Labour refugees like me joining, people that weren't Labour that just want to be involved in something new, because we need a political. If this doesn't make anyone understand, any of my friends still within Labour, anyone that's left that's feeling dejected and sort of just, what the hell are we going to do now? If this doesn't spur you on to realise that we need a democratic political revolution, I don't know what will. I don't know what will. If this doesn't wake people up that have been sort of sleepwalking through the past 10 years, past 20 years, past 30 years, I don't know what will. Things cannot go back to the way they were. My great fear is, and I'm sure you'll maybe, that they will, both here and in the US. They'll certainly try and take things back to the way they were, but of course they're going to have a big problem, because when the COVID lockdown or COVID crisis has passed, or the worst of it, I don't think they're really accepting what the state of the global economy is going to be in, the Western sort of economy is going to be like. Unemployment figures are skyrocketing, and I believe at a faster rate than they were even during the Great Depression. So collapse of oil prices, complete collapse, collapse of large parts of the farming sector, which is a big deal in a place like Wales, because that's a lot of our sort of GDP comes from farming. Price of lamb's apparently gone through the floor. Milk producers, same problem. So yeah, I don't think. I heard the Tories thought apparently the Tories think there's going to be some sort of bounce back or something. Which is just bizarre. I don't know what universe they live in, but it ain't the same one that you and me live in. But anyway, a few more videos probably coming during the week that aren't from to do with the lockdown, just other things I want to talk about if I get time to. And I'll see you next time, in a week's time. So look after yourselves, stay safe, take care, and solidarity.